It is indeed a pleasure to see so many of you here. We gather here for life's rich moments of the late Professor Calestous Juma, where we signal the end of life and try to express what that means at this important moment, memorial lecture in honor of the late Professor Juma. We honor his memory with this dedicated moment of warmth and affection to science, technology, and innovation, and in the progression of the years he lived. Professor Calestous Juma has been a companion in the journey of many others, including our very own president. Professor Calestous Juma was born in June 1953 in Kenya. His life may not have reached to the headlines, but by that wonderful mystery of belonging that God has placed within him, Professor Juma reached out to too many hearts in so many ways, especially to science, technology, and innovation, which we are celebrating today. Director of Ceremonies, late Professor Juma's interest in science, technology, and innovation started way back at the age of 9, when an overflow of water in his village led to a flood, and as a result, shortage of food in the entire community was realized. That event nurtured his first innovation experience. We are informed that due to his unique and promising way of writing at the early stage of his life, he was hired by Kenya's daily national newspaper, making him the first African journalist writer of science and environment. Director of Ceremonies, it is imperative that we teach our children and youth about these great sons and daughters of our continent and their great sacrifices, for the young people are our future. Our youth should understand what selfless service on behalf of others can achieve. The late Professor Calestous Juma left a mark of monumental achievement in Africa and the whole world. This African icon and mentor sadly passed away on Friday the 15th of December 2017 after a 2-year-long battle with cancer. I believe that Professor Calestous Juma would say to the youth of Africa today, many years after independence, what President J.F. Kennedy said to the youth of America of his time. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. Director of Ceremonies, I want to sincerely thank and acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, the President, Dr. Hage Geingob, who had the privilege of having met this illustrious son of our continent to this memorial lecture. In September 2016, His Excellency the President delivered a public address at the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at Harvard University, which public lecture was moderated by none other than the late Professor Calestous Juma. Your Excellency, your presence here speaks volumes and is highly appreciated that though you have lost your good friend, Dr. Theoben Burira, you elected to grace this platform. As Minister of Higher Education, Training and Innovation, allow me to welcome our guest speaker, the Honorable Naledi Pandor, South African Minister of Higher Education and Training, to the Republic of Namibia, and indeed to the Namibia University of Science and Technology. To my fellow ministers and deputy ministers, welcome to this very important memory event in memory of a great African scientist and writer. May I also welcome and thank the High Commissioner of the Republic of Kenya, other dignitaries present here, for making time to this memorial lecture, to pay tribute to the late Professor Juma and equally to be inspired. To the media here present, welcome and thank you for always informing our citizens about events such as this. Ladies and gentlemen and fellow citizens present here, please feel welcome to NAST. I have no doubt that you will be challenged, excited, and inspired by the story and the presentations here tonight. May the soul of Professor Calestous Juma continue to rest in eternal peace.
Thank you, Director of Ceremonies, for this opportunity to pay my tribute to Professor Calestous Juma on behalf of the government and the people of the Republic of Kenya. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first allow me, Your Excellency, to convey to you and to the people of Namibia our heartfelt condolences on the passing on of the Honorable Theo Ben-Gurion, a liberation icon, an astute diplomat, and one of the great builders of the foundation on which Namibia stands today. We, the people of Kenya, stand with you at this time of grief, and we pray that his soul will rest in eternal peace, and the good Lord will condole the people of Namibia. Your Excellency, I also want to confess that when I received the news that we'll be holding this memorial lecture in honor of Professor Calestous Juma, and I communicated to my capital, as we always do, now you can know we report back home. It was met with a lot of exclamation. Others said fantastic, others said why? And it was not why questioning the intentions, it was a why saying, how can he be honored beyond our country? Your Excellency, this indeed is an indication of your generosity of spirit, you and the government and the people of Namibia, for taking the time and effort to honor one of Kenya's most illustrious sons by holding such a remarkable memorial lecture, to remember him for what he did, for his contribution to society and his contribution to this country, Namibia. I further wish to convey sentiments of gratitude from Mrs. Alison Field Juma, his widow, and his son, Eric, who even though could not join us here physically today, this evening, they feel very much a part of this memorial and are humbled. They are humbled by this selfless act to honor their beloved father and husband. Your Excellency, this gesture speaks to the generosity of spirit and to the abundance of virtue of gratitude by the Namibian people to their friends, whether living or departed, whether nations, institutions, or individuals. Virtues such as this, Your Excellency, are rare in today's increasingly self-centered world. It is indeed a loud proclamation that you value and you cherish friendship. And now to my tribute, which is an adaptation of a tribute that was read and presented by His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya, during the Requiem Mass of the late Calestous Juma in Nairobi earlier this year. Your Excellency, if the words that I'm going to speak sound a bit familiar, it's because they are not my own, and you may have heard them before, read them somewhere, maybe in the booklet. So I must honor so that I'm not accused of plagiarism. We meet here today to remember and to celebrate and to reflect on the life and achievement of Professor Calestous Juma. Our words of commemoration cannot match his achievements, but they can assuage the collective grief and remind us to emulate the example that he set. Professor Calestous Juma enjoyed an exemplary career as a teacher, a technologist, and as an author and an authority on innovation. His journey, as we know, may have ended in Boston, but it began in Port Victoria, Busia County in Western Kenya. The dates have already been given by our Honorable Minister when she read earlier. And this is not far from the shores of Lake Victoria, which you may know, and is approximately 400 kilometers from the capital city of Nairobi. He was born in a rural area. The first act of his career was probably his graduation from a Goji Teachers College in Meru County, on the slopes of Mount Kenya, some 300 kilometers northwest of the capital, Nairobi. And from there, he went on to teach and to impart his love of learning to many. And before long, he had moved into policy work, founding the African Center for Technology Studies. He was later to become the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. That was before making his way to Harvard, where he taught development and innovation and mentored a generation of students. If you listen to what many of his colleagues in Harvard had to say, they say he was one of the more popular professors because of his accessibility and generosity in sharing his knowledge. That, in bare outline, because his journey is long and illustrious, it's not possible to delve into the whole of it, is the formal career of the scholar that we honor and celebrate today, Professor Calestous Juma. But what, we must ask ourselves, can we learn from his life? What lessons has he left us? The first is perseverance. Professor Juma's formal teaching career began at rural Kenya and ended at the prestigious Harvard. That is the power of perseverance. That is the power of persistence. He simply kept going, improving himself and his students along the way. And that's a lesson that we ought to take to heart. And particularly, I speak knowing that I'm in an academic institution. And this is to say that your dreams are valid. You can go and walk and reach the heights that Professor Calestous reached and go even beyond. The second virtue that he taught us is to treasure innovation. If something didn't work, Professor Juma was willing to try something different. You have already heard his journey and his attempts at fixing things and fiddling with things. And if it could be done better, he would show how it could be done. He never gave up. Indeed, anyone who has read his book on innovation and its enemies will know that he understood resistance to innovation, but he knew that it could be overcome by patient education as well as institutional change. His clear-eyed devotion to innovation is now more important than it was when he began his career. And this is something that we can all learn from him. We therefore ought also to learn to love learning as he did. Indeed, as I said earlier, his appetite for knowledge, and more importantly, his generosity in sharing it was astonishing. As we honor and celebrate Professor Juma's achievement, we have the consolation that comes from knowing that his was a life of scholarship, of humility, and of service to his country, his continent, and the many friends like the Namibian people, and indeed to all humanity. It was a life exceptionally well lived. May God rest the soul of Professor Juma in eternal peace, and may he comfort and console all those who loved him and learned from him. Thank you very much. God bless you. Asanteni sana kwa kunisikiza.
Firstly, I wish to extend my deep sense of gratitude to State House for reaching out to the Namibia University of Science and Technology, NUST, to host this prestigious academic gathering, as initiated by His Excellency the President, under the heading Professor Juma Memorial Lecture, Public Policy Options for Science and Technology in Africa. In addition to NUST being Namibia's only technological university, with a core mission that embraces science and technology, research and development, entrepreneurship and innovation, it is also the natural home for public discourse on any relevant scientific or other development topics. In the same vein, I'm deeply honored to provide a high-level reflection on Professor Calestous Juma's unfinished paper titled Science and Technology Advice to African Presidents. I'm humbled by this opportunity to comment on the scholarly work of one of Africa's preeminent intellectuals. I shall not critique the paper. I will rather highlight the critical issues raised and the recommendations postulated. The paper consists of 5 sections or chapters as follows. The first section presents the key features of Africa's technological vision as expressed in the various presidential summits convened by the African Union or AU. Section 2 examines the key global trends in presidential science and technology advice. Section 3 or Chapter 3 provides an overview of the institutional arrangements and models used to provide presidential science and technology advice. Chapter 4 uses the case of Namibia to illustrate how structures of government, often arising from national constitutions, can hinder or facilitate the effective provision of presidential advice. And the final chapter, 5, outlines various options that could be pursued to strengthen the institution of presidential science and technology advice. But first, as we embark on this analysis, I shall provide a synopsis or reflection which speaks to the background against which the paper is framed. To be clear, the paper analyzes Africa's development scenarios and challenges in science and technology, research and development, and innovation, and poses various solutions based on best practices. But it does not impose a particular solution for a particular president, government, or government system. These 5 indicators, science, technology, research, development, and innovation, are measures or indications of or potential for socio-economic development. For instance, the index rank of science and technology capacity indicates the status of a country as scientifically advanced, scientifically proficient, scientifically developing, and scientifically lagging. Thus, expenditure on these 5 development factors is a key indicator of government and private sector efforts to obtain a competitive advantage in science and technology. It is a proven fact that science has helped stimulate economic growth in regions investing in innovative solutions around the world. However, in respect of all the 5 factors, Africa lags behind, thus making the case for stronger scientific and technological advice, foundations, renewal, and revival more urgent. In other words, a number of African countries are poised to reap the economic benefits of increased investment in science and technology, expressed as a percentage of the national gross domestic product or percent of GDP. For example, while the global R&D expenditure for the world stands at 2.27% of GDP, for Namibia it reflects a meager investment of 0.34%, much lower than the agreed 1% of GDP. In contrast, Namibia's military spending stands at 1.8% of GDP, with little investment in R&D on its part. It's clear that we're not building a knowledge economy. Some would say we're building a military economy. But this is academic freedom, I've had it been said many times. On this turf, I am protected, so I can say whatever. I've seen the military sometimes in the barracks when I go home. The paper highlights that while the above indicators are foundations of development, these are strongly linked to tertiary education enrollment. Tertiary foundation must fulfill the role as drivers of growth and technological capacity in research, development, and innovation. But once again, Africa's tertiary enrollment rates among the lowest in the world. The average for Africa is 7.1% compared to 25% elsewhere in the world. This evidence shows that African countries still lag behind in science and technology capability. As African countries advance in science and technology capability, the changes of orienting economies towards sustained and sustainable growth are greatly enhanced. It is for these reasons that the paper on science and technology advice to African presidents will play a critical role in shaping policy frameworks. In the introduction, the paper briefly sketches the history of presence of Western technology through innovation and colonization, when technologies were employed to subjugate African populations and exploit them, resulting in racial and power imbalances. And it further sketches contestations between indigenous and Western technologies. Following colonization, economic integration and transformation of Africa became possible, leading to the replacement of the OAU as we know it, which was politically and which was driven by political and decolonization agenda with the AU, which is driven by a development agenda. To the extent to which the mental shift is reflected in the organization of government, so they can serve as facilitators of technological innovation, is one of Africa's emerging policy challenges. They require Africa's political commitment to moving the economies from being resource-driven to being innovation-led. Let's now delve into the details of the 5 chapters one by one. The introduction deals with the key features of Africa's technological vision, as expressed in the various presidential summits covered by the AU. This mental shift alludes to earlier this mental shift alluded to earlier led to the adoption of the AU's 10-year Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, or STISA 24. This is a policy orientation meant to accelerate Africa's 50-year Agenda 2063, aiming for inclusive growth and sustainable development. The strategy accounts for Africa's contemporary levels of development and their persistence, and is about harnessing science, technology, and innovation to help solve 6 key challenges: building infrastructure, eliminating hunger, improving human development, protecting the environment, enhancing social cohesion, and spreading prosperity. All in all, the importance of harvesting science and leveraging existing technologies and discovery is necessary to drive development by creating new enterprises and expanding development growth options. This approach also includes fostering innovation through interactions between government, academia, business, and civil society associations, the quadruplex. Therefore, STISA 2024 has identified 4 strategic actions that reflect Africa's state of development while accommodating different states. And these are investing in infrastructure, both physical projects and research facilities, building technological and technical capabilities, incubating and upscaling enterprises, building the innovation state. This requires creativity and flexibility from African policymakers and from them to act as agents and champions of the innovation state, thereby providing coordinated policies that fit specific purposes. In short, the African countries need to create governance structures and policy environments that nurture innovation and enhance continuous policy adjustment. This is best achieved with the support of offices in science, technology, and innovation advice for heads of state and government. The paper points out that no African country has such a statutory office, whose function would be to advise on how to incrementally adjust governance structures to support innovation. And as such, an approach will leverage the country's regular investments in infrastructure, education, and entrepreneurship to support innovation. The paper also highlights that making innovation a routine aspect of existing activities involves less additional financial investment than other routes. Chapter 2 provides a synthesis of lessons learned worldwide, speaking of codification of practices in various countries, mostly in industrialized world. Thus, the principles of science and technology advice stress the importance of the quality of advice and selection of the appropriate principles to fit national realities, underlining the use of democratic principles such as openness, effectiveness, and policy advice, and continuous institutional self-review and advisory mechanisms. The paper puts forward the notion that Africa's take to science and technology and innovation advice has been based on political appointments of presidential advisors, designating existing ministers to serve as advisors, and creating advisory councils. These approaches reflect the nature of national constitution structure, limited financial and human resources, and lack of legal capacity to sustain science and technology advice. The problem is accentuated by the nascent nature of national scientific academies, or lack thereof. On the other hand, the quality of science and technology advice depends on maintaining quality expert advice, which depends on a variety of conditions that include early and appropriate identification of issues, recognition and appropriate treatment of scientific uncertainty of risk, and diversity of opinion and cross-disciplinary approaches. However, the main problem is Africa's countries' institutional arrangements that foster advice while hoping to maintain independence. This is influenced by domestic conditions such as funding and robustness of scientific, engineering, and technological community. Therefore, the advice is that early and appropriate identification is a key aspect of the quality of presidential advice on science and technology. There is a need for building science academies to interact with the public, with politicians, and the wider scientific community. In summary, the quality of science and technology advice depends on various preconditions, such as qualified and quality advisors, diversity of views and cross-disciplinary approaches to scientific questions, accuracy of scientific advice based on scientific evidence, analysis, and conclusions, financial, intellectual, and political independence and disinterestedness in outcomes, public trust in information and public in policy based on appropriate and sound active mechanisms, inclusiveness and openness to all institutions and sectors of society, and finally, review and feedback. Chapter 3 explores 4 models derived from an analysis of existing review and feedback mechanisms. And this is best practice comparison. 1, the agency outreach model, which is more like the triple helix that we spoke about a bit earlier, in engaging all stakeholders in society. He says that this may require resources that developing countries do not have or cannot afford, but it's more like resources that we have but we don't invest in the model, as far as I'm concerned. The second model is independent advisory model for priority setting, which is more suitable for developing economies and involves the science agency as a leader that seeks advice or input from an objective group. The third model is a convened science advisory board model for priority setting, and this is an advisory committee that can have members with several year terms and can be convened to advise on scientific and engineering advice. So they provide external advice. The fourth model is a network model of science, which draws advice from sectoral advisory mechanisms to inform national decisions. For example, a chief scientist in the president's office coordinates input on specific issues from across the different departments. This requires extensive financial and institutional resources. Given the various models, the paper continues to probe the question of institutions of presidential advice. It recognizes that advising presidents happens at all government levels, as advice can be sought in various ways. The primary difference between advice mechanisms exists as follows. At which level is scientific input received? How formal or flexible is the advisory process? What is the relative use of science advice in different branches of government, executive and legislative? And to what degree are advisors involved in the decision-making process? The establishment of institutions to advise presidents should be structured to consider organizational, financial, and political characteristics of the country. There is scope also for scientific and engineering academies and science and technology advisors, which should be established and maintained as one way of realizing professional advice. Academies can grow from the scientific and engineering community independently, but they can also grow through concerted efforts by the government. In other cases, funding and resources shape both the conscious innovation and natural evolution of academies. The paper recognizes institutional obstacles that can hinder establishment, evolution, and success of science and technology advice, and some of these are lack of political will, often attributed to the president. It's not from me. Financial capability and sustainability, and constitutional, legal, and institutional parameters. I still hope I get invited to State House. The fourth chapter deals with presidential advice in Africa, the case for Namibia. In this chapter, the paper studies Namibia's constitutional, legislative, governance, and executive provisions in order to frame a case study for Africa. Unfortunately, the work wasn't completed, and there are no firm recommendations on science and technology advice for Namibia as a model. But it is evident that a model or a hybrid of models proposed in the paper are workable solutions for Namibia and Africa. The torch has been passed on to the current and future generations. The job is unfinished. And chapter 5 deals with advice on strengthening presidential science and technology advice. It is essentially a capstone project crystallizing presidential advice in science and technology. It proposes 5 solutions. 1, adopt a high-level strategic vision for innovation and development. 2, reform the various branches of government. 3, build capacity to manage advisory processes. And 4, improve funding and legal capacity for advisory activities. These could be the building blocks for establishing a dedicated office of chief scientist in the President's office. In order to enhance public accountability, legal arrangements or instruments should be put in place. But all in all, it should be understood that advisory offices do not have implementation functions in the same way as do presidential academic advisors. In conclusion, the paper has outlined the increasing importance of science, technology, and innovation as major sources of economic transformation, and has presented key concepts, procedures, and institutional arrangements needed to strengthen scientific advice. An indicative roadmap includes adopting a high-level strategic vision for innovation and development, reforming the various branches of government to reflect a coordinated approach to science and technology advice, diversify advisory mechanisms and procedures to reduce uncertainty, build capacity to manage advisory processes, and improving the funding and legal capacity for science and technology advice. There is no viable alternative to adopting an evidence-based approach to decision-making and codifying the activities of law and institutions. Once again, I thank you for the occasion to present this synopsis on this commemorative paper and for your amiable attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, 2 weeks ago, I was in Nigeria, where I traveled to Eyubu Ode to bid my farewell to a friend, a mentor, and a great thinker, Professor Adebayo Adedeji, who passed away on April 25th, 2018, and was finally laid to rest in his hometown on 7th of July as, quote unquote, possessing a clear-eyed devotion for innovation. I agree with President Kenyatta. Calestous is a man whose tremendous impact on the African and global educational landscape is befitting of tonight's tribute. The Pan-African intellectual vanguard is mourning as a result of their loss. We are mourning the Pan-African and Pan-African vanguard. I think, what Pan-Africans? Are you not? Oh, very few, huh? So we are mourning. But we are comforted. For yesterday, 18 July 2018, was a centenary of our wise elder, the celebrated Nelson Mandela, a man who embraced the diversity of ideas and worked tirelessly for an inclusive humanity. Calestous, Bio, and Theoben are with Madiba in that rich pantheon, having done what is humanly possible for a better humanity. In his book, which can be described as one of the blueprints for Pan-Africanism, Africa Must Unite, Kwame Nkrumah dictates a whole chapter to the intellectual vanguard. In the chapter, he grounds his argument on the importance of intellectualism by stating that, and I quote, "The history of human achievement illustrates that when an awakened intellectuals emerges from a subject people, it becomes the vanguard of the struggle against alien." Nkrumah continues his argument by highlighting the importance of developing an African personality, and I quote him, "which must provide the educational and intellectual foundations of our Pan-African future." The hard work, dedication, and intellectual journey of Professor Juma embodies the concepts of the intellectual vanguard. He devoted his intelligence to unlock Africa's contribution to the fourth industrial revolution, dominated by innovation and technological advancement. By seeking to immerse Africa's policy options into the fourth industrial revolution, Calestous Juma represents the true vanguard. Every generation needs innovative scholars to act as gateways for ideas between the past, the present, and the future. These extraordinary thinkers are the harbingers of change, because without thinking about constant change, society cannot progress. Hence, change is the only constant. Without science, technology, and immersion in the fourth industrial revolution, Africa will lag behind the rest of the world. I have always emphasized that the fact that the only way Africa will attain its aspirations as outlined in AU Agenda 2063 is to make a quantum leap. Great thinkers, including Calestous, remain torchbearers and catalysts for that quantum leap in the transformation of Africa. Professor Calestous Juma ascended to the highest levels of academia, cementing his name in the annals of one of the foremost Ivy League schools, Harvard University, where he was the director of the school's Science, Technology, and Globalization project. But his passion for Kenya and African soil animated his transformational scholarship. He never let go of the thread that pulls together the Pan-Africanism that Comrade Juma represents. That's the thread that pulls all of us who are true Africans, whether you are white or black, together. I had the pleasure to meet this great scholar for the last time during my visit to the United States in 2016, when I was invited to deliver a lecture at the Harvard Kennedy School. Professor Juma was the moderator of the event, and I had the pleasure to benefit from his incisive brain and bonded with him during the course of that morning. I did not know it at that time, but it was the last opportunity I had to experience the enthusiasm and warmth of Professor Juma, and that is the last time that I interact because he used to communicate. In Africa, we have often been accused, fairly or unfairly, of not appreciating the percentages of this world, our scholars. Maybe it is due to the fact that many African scholars succumbed to the false belief that to be considered a great thinker and intellectual, one had to don a gown of Afro-pessimism. Thus, many African intellectuals become synonymous with the reactionary leanings and tendencies, causing a wedge to develop between the intellectual class and the ruling class. Furthermore, it could be argued that the glorious period of African independence, which saw the legendary feats of icons such as Kwame Nkrumah, Ahmed Sekou Touré, Julius Nyerere, Malimo, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Jomo Kenyatta, Patrice Lumumba, and others, was followed by a tumultuous period characterized by coups, coup d'etats, one-party states, and military strongmen who ruled without question. By the way, Namibians have a tendency to want to be arrested, to want to be martyrs. Journalists are hiding and they are hoping they will be arrested so that the world can say Namibia is not free enough. South Africa, the same. Only problem is we suffered too long, South Africa and Namibia. And freedom we got, we think it's absolute. The way we talk also is absolute. We don't know your freedom of speech ends, where my freedom also starts, whether I'm a president or not. And you, John, why do you think you'll not be invited to say? For what is it you said here? We don't waste time. Some journalists are thinking we are following them around. We have many other important things. Freedom of speech. Ask the old man sitting there. What were we fighting for all these years? For free press, for democracy, freedom of movement. That's what we were fighting for. Now you want to do something and we are going to arrest you. Please write. I said, freedom of press is guaranteed. That's what I said. So please write. All it is we are saying is scholarly. That's all we are saying. Be objective and give us information we can learn something from. Not just gossiping. Okay, the paper now. In this value, many scholars who dared to question the conditions of that time were considered enemies of the state, as he's trying to pretend here, and forced to flee the country. It's true. Kwame Nkrumah and them valued education, and they set up universities immediately after independence. They trained people, and these people, those scholars must be independent, as Juma is saying. And then you maybe learned from those days that they will be arrested. So many of them, therefore, I think, left what we regard as brain drain. However, as we have seen through the endeavors of outstanding intellectuals such as Calestous, Juma, Adebayo, Naledi, and others, it is actually a brain game for Africa. To have these scholars to go now and do their work seriously as scholars and still know they're Africans. in that sense, it's a brain game. Many of our foremost intellectuals who went abroad to study at leading universities of the world returned their wealth of knowledge to disseminate to fellow Africans and to spearhead policy formulation and improve governance on the continent. Madame Pandor, you are among this distinguished group and are part of the brain circulation. When I now, you see, we used to say, when Africans were running to Europe, say that, oh, I didn't put it, that's a brain drain. Now, as I said, when you are there and you gain knowledge and experience and you feedback, that's now the brain gain. But when I use the fellow African within Africa, that is now brain circulation. So you are one of them, that's why I am. Many of our institutions, including the African Union, have and continue to benefit from the incredible insights of our scholars. The emergence of the new Africa we want is a result of the endless sweat and perseverance of our erudite African thinkers, of whom Calestous Juma is a distinguished member. Before his passing, Professor Juma was working on a paper entitled Science and Technology Advice to African Residents. That paper was already introduced, analyzed by Professor. It was not complete, as you know. So we thought we'd have this lecture. There's some of the scholars, right? Professor here, a professor there, and that, improve on it. And look at it. Because at my office, I have only 5 advisors. 5. Both were already there. They are here. You understand that? You can see who you are. Stand up. It's transparency. Now, these are people who are advising, and you see the quality of work. Quality of work that comes from the office. You need advisors who are not doing justice to the founding father and then not giving them proper scholars to advise them. I thought I could do the advice. So, advisors, good ones will deliver unnecessary. But paper has been discussed by Professor here. I say we are going to improve on it. However, in this modern era of leadership, one must choose suitable people who possess the requisite knowledge to assist the policy-making process. It is why we are gathered here today to pay tribute to a brother from Kenya who understood that the only way Africa could remain competitive in the global landscape is through the pursuit of science, technology, and innovation. One cannot complete a tribute to Professor Calestous Juma without talking about his greatest passion, science and technology. As earlier alluded to, another scholar and practitioner, Honorable Naledi Pandor, will give us a lecture on public policy advice on science and technology. However, I wish to briefly highlight the importance of science and technology in the context of our developmental objectives. Former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, said, and I quote, "One of the most effective channels of eradicating poverty, creating wealth, and enhancing competitiveness is through the acquisition, adaptation, and application of relevant technologies." The new Africa we want is still faced with several deficits with regard to its socio-economic architecture. Issues such as poverty, income inequality, and unemployment continue to trouble the minds of politicians and academics alike. There is a need for greater productivity within our various economic sectors to catapult us to sustained levels of global economic competitiveness. To achieve a rise in productivity levels, it is pertinent that we improve managerial practices, bring about organizational change, and utilize science, technology, and innovation in the production of goods and services. By increasing investments in information and communication technology, we will improve the quality of capital and labor through enhancing the skills of workers within African economies. There is also a need for greater emphasis on research and development. And you are right, my brother, we are very poor there. But we also need the researchers, proper ones, so we can spend money on them. Not to spend money on people who are just trying to please somebody else. So, yes, research and development and other knowledge-based investments to sustain our economic levels and growth are very necessary. We must spend money on research if you want to move forward. Given this reality, it is crucial that we not only honor this intellectual giant through heartfelt tributes at his memorial lecture and beyond, but that we assume the responsibility to advance the extraordinary work he left behind. We should pick up the baton where he left off and continue the race towards a future of innovation, embracing Professor Juma's unwavering enthusiasm. One of the greatest minds in the history of humanity, Albert Einstein, once said, and I quote, unquote, intellectual growth should commence at birth and cease only at death. I am cautious not to disagree with this great mind, but I believe that Professor Calestous Juma's intellectual growth, which commenced at his birth near the shores of Lake Victoria in Busia, Kenya, did not cease with his death in Boston, USA. His legacy will live on. The ideas of his mind will continue to echo behind the confines of this final resting place. Will ensure that the academic passion and zeal of this distinguished son of Africa will continue to enlighten students, policy makers, as we endeavor to propel our continent towards scientific and technological excellence and innovations. God bless his soul, and I thank you.
And of course, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I hope I have satisfied protocol. I've never been to diplomatic school, so I may have got it somewhat wrong, but I have tried my best. Allow me then, Honorable Director of Ceremonies, to begin by expressing, on behalf of our government, our cabinet, and our people, our deepest sympathy on the passing of Dr. Theo Ben-Guira, a great comrade and leader of Namibia and the African continent. We share in your loss, and we are partners with you in remembering the road he traveled and the contribution he made, both to Namibia, but to our region and the African continent broadly. Let me begin my lecture there. Now, I'm one who's not known to be nervous, but there have been so many speakers, and I thought we were just coming to a small little occasion. So to be in a room with two presidents, several ministers, ambassadors, and students, although they're much nicer students than some of ours, it's really quite something. So I'm really, really grateful to be here. I first heard of Professor Juma in 2010, soon after I was appointed Minister of Science and Technology. I received an email in March 2010 that he had written to a staff member in the office of the presidency. The letter went as follows. I'm writing to inquire if the president of Africa's most powerful science nation has a science and technology advisor. If not, please forward this letter to the right person in the office of the president so that remedial action can be taken expeditiously. I believe, it continued, that South Africa should continue to serve as a role model for the rest of the continent on the importance of science and technology. It is for this reason that South Africa's president should have a science and technology advisor. If there are reasons not to have such a position, then I would like to have the opportunity to meet the president to discuss the matter with him. I would like to come accompanied by Professor Mohammed Hassan, President of the Academy of Sciences for the Developing World, and Dr. Shem Arungu Olende, President of the African Academy of Sciences. He concluded, if such an advisor exists, please do connect me to him or her and consider the contents of this email moot. Best regards, Calestous Juma, PhD, FRS, NAS, TWAS, African Academy of Sciences, Professor of the Practice of International Development, Harvard Kennedy School. Well, I suppose the President's office sent that letter to me to respond. At the time when I read it, I thought, this professor is being a little presumptuous. But I see from his unfinished draft for Namibia on science advice that he continued to believe and was genuine in his belief in the importance of presidential science advisors. I came to know him better after we met at President Obama's US-Africa Summit in 2015, and through his subsequent advisory role in the development of the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, or STISA. And I am still immensely attracted to three of his key concerns about which he wrote so much. He argued that the bioeconomy would transform African agriculture. He wanted African universities reinvented and diversified. And thirdly, he was keen on the humanities and social sciences and in favor of a new curriculum. Now, what do we know about Africa and science, as well as innovation indicators? We don't, as Africans, devote a lot of time to deliberating on science and its potential contribution to development on our continent. Well, here are some of the facts. Africa, our home, is home to 15% of the world's population and produces 5% of the world's gross domestic product. But it accounts for only 1.3% of the globe's investment in research and development. Africa Africa also holds only 0.1% of the world's patents. These are scary statistics, because if we hold only 0.1% of world patents, it means we are producing the least knowledge in the world. And it's scary. Why? We are relying on others to produce knowledge about us. However, despite these dismal statistics, a recent World Bank report reveals that there has been a significant growth in sub-Saharan research in Africa, but notes that inter-African research links are rare. In fact, just last week, a famous South African academic, Professor Zeleza, has just published a very important paper on higher education in Africa. And he has looked at our research productivity in that paper, and he indicates that we have become better at publishing with colleagues in other parts of the world, which is a good sign, but we are not publishing with each other. Half of the research that has been identified in the World Bank report indicates that over 50% of our productivity is in the health sciences. There is very clearly, as the World Bank report reveals, quite a significant scientific base on the African continent. But it also indicates that we have work to do in training and strengthening our African research relationships. Our aim as Africa has to be to transform science, technology, and innovation on the African continent. It is impossible for us to thrive in isolation. We have to become part of an African research and innovation system. And we've got to be serious about this. We cannot be satisfied contributing 0.1% of patents. We can't pat ourselves on the back producing 1.3% of research. It's just unacceptable. But pleasingly, more and more African researchers are broadening their horizons and engaging in much needed projects in food security, in energy, in transport, and in health research, particularly research in malaria and HIV. So we have begun to see the number of papers from African researchers almost double in just over a decade. And that's great, but the road we have to catch up on is such a long one. But I've been pleased to see reports that there's improvement in quantity, there's improvement in quality, and the international citation, according to data from Scopus, indicates that there is a significant improvement. Scopus is the largest database of peer-reviewed literature. And if your literature is peer-reviewed, then it means other colleagues have recognized you're doing important work. We are seeing more and more funding for African research. This includes the Grand Challenges Africa grants, $7 million in grants over the next 5 years for scientific breakthroughs in maternal health care and precision medicine in Africa. We have the Kwame Nkrumah Scientific Award from the African Union, $100,000 to top African scientists who provide innovations in life and earth science. The next Einstein Fellowship, which recognizes Africa's distinguished scientists under the age of 42. Neil Turok, the founder of the Next Einstein Initiative, tweeted recently, When Africans enter science in large numbers, with their diversity, backgrounds, and motivation, they will make massive, transformative discoveries. Those discoveries are just waiting there to be made, he concluded. The African Academy of Sciences is part of this drive and is doing sterling work to build intra-African research and development partnership. The African Academy's Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa is currently managing the $100 million Developing Excellence in Leadership, Training and Science, or the Delta's Africa program. These initiatives create a human resource pipeline that can sustain this area of research work into the future, and which can help us contribute to the availability of a critical mass of globally competitive African health scientists. The issue of critical mass is important because we tend to operate on the basis of fairly modest numbers. But small numbers of PhDs don't give you critical mass. You need to exponentially grow the number in order for the impact to actually occur. So this issue of critical mass must not escape us. Our continent needs highly capable African scholars. We need African research leaders able to hold their own in a global environment, just as the late Professor Juma could. We already have some of these scientists, but we need so many thousands more. We need to strengthen and build on the initiatives I've made reference to, and many others, to ensure a robust and sustainable research and innovation sector in all African countries. Increased attention must be given to finding resources to increase our research focus beyond agriculture and health. Young researchers have a wide range of fields of interest. We have to support them to explore a diversity of disciplines. Now, young people, as they look at us here, will probably see all of us are quite aging, and it is vital that you devote attention to becoming academics and scholars. Because a lot of you think the best place to be is in a bank, earning a whole lot of money. But you're not producing knowledge for the continent. We need researchers. We need academics. We need professors. And it's only from your ranks that those people can come. So as you talk, as they do in our country, about decolonization of higher education, remember that the colonizer cannot be a decolonizer. And so you've got to be the new academic who is teaching. Now, the 2015 UNESCO Science Report made some very fascinating reading. It indicated that there has been a positive shift in research development and innovation. The report shows the success of the African Union's first African Science, Technology and Innovation Plan of Action. Recently, the African Union adopted its second Africa Plan. It prioritizes science to drive economic and social development across the continent. It commits signatory countries to 6 key goals. These include tackling hunger, disease, and unemployment, and it indicates that structures will be set up to pursue these goals. Now, I'm sure gathered in this room, since I believe many of you are students of science, we all know that breakthrough or frontier science, as they call it, takes a long time, and that breakthroughs are immensely difficult to predict. All that the task is about is getting the right balance between funding basic or frontier science and focusing on particular fields of science in which we know that we want to build new industries. It is for this distinction that our country, South Africa, has made such a strong investment in astronomy. This is why we have made such a strong investment in space science. This is why we are investing more in biotechnology and nanotechnology. Now, we fully appreciate, as Professor Juma did, that we cannot do any of these things without the best evidence-based advice available. So, what are some of the things we've done in South Africa to address these gaps, as well as in our republic here, Namibia? A decade ago, our innovation system faced three major challenges. Firstly, there was a tension between the different policy processes followed in higher education and in science and technology. The two operated very separately and distinctly. Second, it seemed to many that science and technology department targeted strategic and applied research at the expense of basic research. So now the problem here is, if you focus solely on solving problems on applied science, and you neglect mathematics, biology, physics, you do not have the foundation to continue the kind of focus that you want. And so it shouldn't be a competition between applied research and basic research. And often we have that in our systems. Even when you do reviews in your systems, you'll find all of us are talking about innovation. Huh? All of us, everybody. But then when you look at what people are studying, you find that we've forgotten we need chemistry, we need geology, we need mathematics, we need physics, we need life sciences. All the sciences are the window to application. The third then problem was it was apparent that we had failed to increase research output and to develop Black and women researchers. Mr. President, what I've done in this little talk is I've tried to imagine what Professor Juma would want to tell us about what we might need to think of doing. So in terms of then that human resource aspect, what these three problems showed was that as South Africa at that time, we were still locked into the pre-1994 research patterns and practices with a few elite institutions producing the majority of the research output. So what we had done was we allowed the apartheid framework we inherited to thrive. However, over the last decade, there has been much improvement on these three challenges to our innovation system. Research output has improved, and I think in terms of scopus, spectacularly in some fields like astronomy and environment sciences. The number of science, engineering, and technology graduates has increased, not as impressively as required, but the number of PhDs certainly has, with a milestone of more black than white PhD graduates reached in 2014. But our innovation system still has to find the best approach. Some of our colleagues do say that the Department of Science and Technology still tends to be mission-oriented, often at the expense of basic research. It is probably true that we have concentrated research in a few areas, what we have called geographic and knowledge advantage areas, what we have called grand challenges, and certainly our premier focus of astronomy, which is for us both a grand challenge area as well as a geographic diaspora and research-intensive institutions on the continent. So what we've tried we also invest in the enablers that we have put in place to turn scientific research into technology. So this is why we invest in our country in centers of excellence, in research chairs, and in national research facilities. Because you must create an ecosystem for research and innovation. Otherwise, it's a bit there. The greatest challenge I think we face as a continent is in providing exciting opportunities to our young people. It's clear that perhaps we can utilize high technology innovations to help us grow employment over the long term. Because as new technology spreads from one sector to adjacent sectors and so on throughout the economy, it can support growth. But it's also clear that emerging high technology sectors by themselves don't employ more people at the moment. Innovation works through the creative destruction of jobs. However, the future lies in the emergence of the vast field of artificial intelligence. And that's what we've begun to focus upon. So let me illustrate briefly through the square kilometer array. I've spent a great deal of time with the square kilometer array, and Namibia is one of the partner countries on the continent. And I've developed a deep appreciation of its importance. I still remember when a scientist in the United States asked me, Minister Pandor, why are you not focusing on food security and agriculture? What are you doing with astronomy sciences? I was a bit of a novice minister then, and I couldn't quite answer her. But when I met her a few years later, I was able to give a brilliant response. So, what I was able to say was, on one hand, big science infrastructure projects like the square kilometer array tend to have unexpected spin-offs. Certainly it's a radio telescope, but it's also an information technology project of the kind that pushes the boundaries of global technology. Big tech companies have become involved in this astronomy project because they know it will allow them to develop the knowledge and technologies that will keep them at the leading edge of computing. Actually, this radio telescope is a big computing project. On the other hand, what could be more important than seeking a better understanding of the origins, how the universe was born, how galaxies and stars are formed? Astronomy is a discipline that gives context to our place in the universe and a framework for how we see the world. The construction of the Square Kilometre Array Phase 1 is set to start in 2018, with early science observations in 2020. Producing the thousands of dishes required for the SKA within the project's timescales will also demand an entirely new way of building highly sophisticated and sensitive scientific instruments, which should lead innovations in manufacturing and construction. Now, when the Minister of Higher Education and Research in Namibia starts to ask the Parliament for money for this initiative, they will fight with you, ministers, they won't understand it. And then when they see all the global IT companies coming into the country, when they see the construction opportunities, you'll become the most popular minister. The completion and unveiling last week of the South African demonstrator contribution to the SKA, the 64-dish meerkat, was one of the crowning moments in my political life. I believe that our continent has begun to make a major investment in the future through the Square Kilometre Array. It will be the first time as Africa that we host global research infrastructure. Global research infrastructure projects play an invaluable, believe it, one day when I got on a small aeroplane to Kimberley, and the gentleman in the seat next to me said, "Good evening, Minister SKA." I realized the public is watching and interested. So there exists then a crucial interface between the global development of science and international development. This interface is most acute in developing countries, whose national development imperatives have to be strongly informed and underpinned by science, technology, and innovation. So in addition to these interests in science focal areas, Professor Juma also had a broader interest in encouraging evidence-based policy development along the lines of the work being done through institutions such as we have in our country. In February 2016, we were privileged to host the Inter-Academy Partnership Conference on Science Advice, which considered the importance of science in policy making across various areas, such as climate change, urbanization, disasters, deadly virus monitoring, or emergency responses on emergencies that confront society broadly. Scientists have a huge responsibility to ensure that scientific debates are informed by solid scientific evidence, by logical argument, by reasoning, and by sound advice. It was argued by some in that science advisors meeting that science advice should be viewed as a component of science diplomacy. Sir Peter Gluckman, a science advisor to the New Zealand government, Prime Minister, has been a leading light in spelling out the importance of science advice. His view is that policy is rarely determined by science alone, but that policy can be informed by evidence. One of my worries in our parliaments and countries, we tend to brainstorm policy. We don't think it through. We don't use evidence-based policy making very well. And that's why we do have quite significant problems with implementing the policies that we develop. If we proceeded our policy thinking with research, we might find we have more success. So he gave a very interesting example, Sir Gluckman, on what New Zealand had done through its government on deciding that it would outlaw the inclusion of folic acid in bread because there'd been a huge uproar that folic acid causes cancer. And the government actually passed a law to outlaw folic acid in bread. He thought that at that time, the science advice given to the government was wrong. He says this was indicative of the fact that the science community had failed to properly communicate to the public on the issue. And what they had caused was a huge fear in the public of folic acid. And so the public reaction compelled the government to take a very problematic policy decision. What I learned from this public engagement is that science informs advice, but it doesn't make policy. There are also different audiences for scientific advice, but the science community tends to focus on offering advice at a national level and very, very rarely at the local government level. And there are different types of science advice. Maybe technical advice, there might be regulatory advice, there may be formal or informal advice, and there might be advice in a context of emergencies. All of these would be vastly different. In South Africa, we have a number of institutions that play a key role in responding to our scientific advice needs. One of the institutions producing evidence-based advice is the Academy of Sciences of South Africa. And I want to say to the distinguished His Excellency that if we don't have a strong Academy of Sciences, it's very difficult to root science in our country. This academy provides evidence-based reports that address a diverse range of topics, from the role of genetically modified organisms in agriculture in Africa to the emerging and little studied threat of drug-resistant tuberculosis, as well as strategies for the development of low-carbon cities or the prevention of a tobacco epidemic in Africa. Another advisory body is the National Advisory Council on Innovation, which is an institution established to provide policy advice to the Minister of Science and Technology and through that ministry to the Cabinet. It is independent of government, and that always scares us, politicians. And it works through standing committees and task teams comprising of experts drawn from universities, science councils, and business. We also have our public research councils, such as the Human Sciences Research Council, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, Medical Research Council, and the Agricultural Research Council. They all contribute to generating scientific advice that may guide policymaking. I believe that evidence-based advice, as Professor Juma advised us, is important to sustaining science-based development in Africa. Consider health. We promote health sciences because we need to improve the quality of life here on our continent. African countries are beginning to be at the forefront of global scientific discovery, as can be seen by the pioneering work being done by scientists in areas such as microbicides to prevent HIV infection, as well as drugs and vaccine development for malaria and tuberculosis. This growth of pioneering work is shown by the full participation, including as funding partners and equal partners by South Africa and 14 other African countries in the European Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership. So, what might Professor Juma suggest we should do as African governments, institutions, to achieve the goals of our science and technology innovation strategy for Africa, as well as our AU Agenda 2063? What might he advise us to invest in to begin catching up and creating real opportunity for robust research and innovation? We are one of the countries that is a champion for the new science, technology, and innovation strategy for Africa, which was adopted by our leaders at the July 2014 African Union Assembly. The strategy focuses on our continent's science, technology, and innovation investment in 6 socioeconomic benefit areas. First, eradicating hunger and ensuring food security on the continent. 2, preventing and controlling disease and ensuring human welfare in Africa. 3, improving intra-African communication through investing in physical and digital infrastructure. 4, protecting Africa's natural resources. 5, building African communities, addressing aspects such as democratization, urbanization, and conflict resolution. And 6, creating wealth for Africa. This is our agenda. This is what we've got to achieve. Science is also at the heart of the AU's Agenda 2063. Very little will come of this plan unless each African country adopts a policy of science-led development and puts an efficient government department in place to pursue it. Only then will our grand plans be able to leverage private and philanthropic participation, such as the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, an initiative of the African Academy of Sciences and the new Partnership for Africa's Development. I might say, Vice Chancellor, that actually funding is not the problem. Getting to know what's out there and accessing it is the challenge. I wish to move toward conclusion by just focusing on 4 features that I believe are necessary to achieve the African science and innovation goals. First, and I hope the President is going to be kind to me here. First, universities and researchers need academic freedom and freedom of expression. The output of research, in fact, I know the President already confirmed that he supports this. The output of researchers is valuable in evidence-based decision-making on science policy. And our councils that are referred to are playing a critical role in preparing independent reports that are key reference points for government and policymakers. But having said that, I must say to our dear scientists that I find they produce really excellent reports. But what I struggled with was extracting the policy advice. And I think we need to develop the talent of writing the reports in a manner that allows the policymakers to extract the policy advice. Because yeah, it's great to read about biomass, but what are you advising me to do after I've read the report? So I think that issue of how we articulate the policy advice is quite important. Nevertheless, our Science Council certainly impact on the areas I've already made a reference to. Of course, science being science, the advice of science councils is not without controversy, and that's where it becomes difficult for politicians. From time to time, this means we need to consult broadly to allow the public to comment on emerging policy or on the views of scientists. This sometimes makes the interaction between scientists and policymakers tense and challenging. Second, effective science policy needs international partnerships. Science and innovation in our country has benefited immensely from a well-crafted and energetic international science diplomacy strategy. Our strategy supports individual researchers, institutions, and government in establishing well-designed and impactful international partnerships. Such links have led to very productive interdisciplinary research outcomes and have also allowed policymakers to form associations that have multiplied access to resources in the form of access to research infrastructure and funding for collaborative teams. Third, policymakers must provide funding for high-level development of graduates and support for both established and emerging researchers. Linked to this is the need for policymakers to have a concrete science agenda with key focus areas clearly articulated to scientists and formally funded by government. Fourth, and my last, evaluation. Evaluation is extremely important. Regular review and the existence of reliable and effective data gathering institutions that report regularly on the system and provide quality data that can be used to reform where reform is needed. Evaluation criteria must also include a focus on indicators of performance that measure research output. I'm a really horrible minister, because when people come with reports to me, I ask them, how many PhDs did you produce? How many masters? How many are women? How many publications? In which journal are they? You can't escape with general staff. We must be strict on evaluation. We must insist on performance. Africa has no time to waste. Many of our countries on the continent do not have these four features, not all of them, we may have some. And they also tend to be quite isolated from international collaboration. We will need to strengthen our efforts at inclusion, as we can no longer be satisfied with the inadequate innovation capacity of Africa. And I've got to say, comrades, that pity only lasts so long. It can't be for life. We have to stand up. Prosperous African nations will be those with governments that create the right enabling environment for science and technology to flourish. Determining the best technology policy is relatively straightforward, but having the people ready to take advantage of resource-rich opportunities is the real challenge. What African governments have to do is to determine where their comparative advantage lies, and then to exploit it on a national scale. Renewable energy, mobile technology, and the bioeconomy are sectors that we believe have massive potential. In South Africa, we tried first to pick winners. We started with an electric car and realized we can't compete with South Korea. We tried with a small-scale nuclear reactor, we didn't succeed. Then we turned to geographic advantage and tried astronomy, and we picked the winner in radio astronomy because we have a comparative advantage in knowledge and geography. These are, I believe, some of the aspects Professor Juma would want us to give attention to. He didn't devote his life to encouraging us to invest in research, in science, in technology, and innovation for us to really debate the character of these things. He had a fundamental interest in Africa being transformed and understood that our participation in science, technology, and innovation was the route to such development. So let's make these aspirations real. And it is, dear colleagues, eminently doable. And I thank you very much.